Thank you, Sister Juliet, for that introduction and my own warm welcome to all of you. I'm presently in Santa Barbara, California, where we're finishing a week of classes with novices from the OFM Franciscan friars, the Capuchin friars, and the conventual friars. So it's a great kind of family gathering here. And this evening, I'm going to kind of kick off the centenary that we're going to be celebrating all year long, the 800th anniversary of the death of St. Francis in 1226. Now, the official celebration will probably take place in different ways, in different places, on the 3rd and 4th of October of this year. So we have 10 months to prepare. But when I was invited to give this Zoom lecture, I thought that since we're right at the beginning of the 800th anniversary year, it might be a good opportunity to kind of introduce the topic and get us prepared. So let me tell you just a little bit about what you're going to be hearing and seeing tonight. I want to pose the question about the differences between different written accounts of the death of St. Francis that come from his early followers. We have different versions of the same story, somewhat in the same way as we have four gospels, four evangelists who tell us the story of Jesus, his life, and his teaching. So we have a number of early witnesses who tell us about the life and the death of Francis of Assisi. I'm going to introduce just a few of them tonight. There are many early Franciscan sources, which I'm sure you can find online at franciscantradition.org and in the published print series in hard copy, Francis of Assisi Early Documents, 3 volumes. I want to begin with what might be considered the most ideal account of the passing, the transitus, or the death of St. Francis. And what I want you to pay attention to is in the story, which I will read, you will also be seeing an image that seems to reflect that particular reading of the events surrounding the death of Francis. As we shift from one written source to another, the picture will also shift because the cast of characters will change with each differing account. So one of the questions that you want to ask yourself is, who's in the picture? Who is pictured as being present at this dramatic event, the death of the Poverello of Assisi? And another question we're going to be asking is, in his last hours, Francis also gave blessings to people. And the account of who gets blessed and how also differs from one source to the other. So to get us started in this exploration of the differing accounts of the life of St. Francis, I'm going to start with some images, and you will hear me in the background reading the story that goes with the picture. So I'll share my screen, and hopefully you will be able to see it. We've got Oliver here, who's the great organizer of these events, and I'm hoping that he will help us if we run into any problems. The death of St. Francis, the 800th anniversary from 1226 to 2026. The famous picture here is Cimabue, St. Francis in the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi, one of my favorite portraits of St. Francis. Here is the first image. This is St. Francis in Glory by the Italian artist Giotto. It is in the ceiling of the lower church of the Basilica of the Saint in Assisi, and the fresco was created around 1320, so nearly 100 years after the death of St. Francis. We see him pictured here, surrounded by the gold representing heaven, surrounded by angels and saints with golden halos. He himself is dressed in a tunic like that of a deacon, and it too is covered in gold. So the little poor man of Assisi is pictured here as being a glorious saint in heaven. And realize that you will be looking above the altar there, and you will see the figure of Francis painted on the ceiling. Let's listen to the earliest account of the death of St. Francis, written for his canonization in 1228 by a friar who had known him but had not spent a lot of time with him, Brother Thomas of Celano, in his Life of St. Francis. In the 1226th year of the incarnation of the Lord, in the 14th year of the indiction, on the 4th day before the nones of October, a Sunday, our most blessed Father Francis departed from the prison of the flesh and soared to the dwellings of the heavenly spirits. So there's a very solemn announcement of the death of St. Francis. This sounds almost like the proclamation of the birth of Christ at the Nativity, which is read before the midnight Mass of Christmas. Thomas continues, "This happened in the city of Assisi where he was born, at St. Mary of the Porciuncula, where he first planted the order of Lesser Brothers. 20 years after he embraced Christ completely, following the life and footsteps of the apostles, bringing to perfect completion what he had begun. In that city, with hymns and praises, his holy and sacred body was laid to rest and honorably enclosed. There it glitters with many miracles to the glory of the Almighty. Amen." That solemn opening will introduce events that are associated with the death of Francis. It is only several generations after his death that we begin to hear some of the stories that make the events seem a little bit more complicated than the way in which Thomas of Celano. He's going to step back a little bit and tell about the events that led up to the actual death of Francis. So he does it kind of backwards. First, he gives the solemn proclamation of the death, and then he backs up like for a few days and says, this is what happened. So let's go now to hear a story. This is a painting by the Swiss artist Eugène Bernard, St. Francis on his deathbed. This was painted around 1913 and became part of a very popular book of paintings, sketches of early Franciscan stories that became kind of a bestseller. Here's Thomas's continuation as he's backing up to tell us about events immediately before the death. When he saw his final day drawing near, as shown to him 2 years earlier by divine revelation, he called to himself the brothers he chose. He blessed each one as it was given to him from above, just as Jacob of old, the patriarch, blessed his sons. He was like another Moses, about to ascend the mountain of the Lord, the mountain that the Lord had shown him when imparting blessings on the children of Israel. Notice here that the brothers are kneeling by the bed of Francis, but Francis is staring up into the ceiling. By this time, Francis is blind, so he cannot see these brothers who are with him. And actually, the blindness of Francis is important because remember, Jacob, the great Old Testament patriarch, was blind and he wasn't sure about how to bless his sons. Uh, it's a it's an interesting comparison that Thomas of Celano has made. One of the people who is pictured as being at the bedside of Francis is this brother, Elias of Cortona, who had been with Francis as one of his disciples for many years and had taken over as the leader of the Franciscan order in the last few years of Francis's life when his health was very poor. So he was kind of the right-hand man of Francis. Thomas then goes on with the story about the blessing. When Brother Elias sat down on his left side with the other brothers around him, the Blessed Father crossed his arms and placed his right hand on Elias's head. So Elias is on the left side of the bed, and Francis wants to bless him with his right hand. So he has to cross his arms. He had lost the sight and use of his bodily eyes, so he asked, "Over whom am I holding my right hand?" "Over Brother Elias," they replied. "And this is what I wish to do," he said. "I bless you, my son, in all and through all. And just as the Most High has increased my brothers and sons in your hands, so too upon you and in you I bless them all. May the King of all bless you in heaven and on earth. I bless you as I can, and more than I can. And what I cannot do, may the one who can do all things do in you. May God remember your work and labors, and may a place be reserved for you." Is pretty simple. Brother Elias, his successor, his vice president, if you like, will assume the leadership of the order with the blessing from Francis's right hand. This was approaching like that holy patriarch Jacob, with his devoted sons standing around him, grieving and tearful at the departure of such a lovable father. He asked, "Where is my firstborn? Come to me, dear son, so my soul may bless you before I die." Then Brother Bernard said secretly to Brother Elias, who was vicar of the order, "Father, go to the right hand of the saint, so he may bless you." Brother Elias placed himself at his right hand, and St. Francis, who had lost his sight from so many tears, put his right hand on the head of Brother Elias and said, "This is not the head of the firstborn, Brother Bernard." Then Brother Bernard went to him at his left hand, and St. Francis crossed his arms like a cross and then placed his right hand on the head of Brother Bernard and the left on the head of Brother Elias, and said, "Brother Bernard, may the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ bless you with every spiritual and heavenly blessing in Christ, since you are the firstborn chosen in this holy order to give an evangelical example, following Christ in evangelical poverty." What was the problem here? Why would you write a much more complicated story about the right hand and the left hand? Elias has now moved and is at the right hand, but Francis doesn't want to bless him with the right hand. So he puts his left hand on Elias's head, crosses the hand, blesses Brother Bernard on the other side. The problem is that Brother Elias, who was his successor, one of his successors as the leader of the order, was excommunicated in 1239 by Pope Gregory IX, basically for agreeing to a treaty with the Muslim Sultan of Egypt to return access to the Christian holy places to Christian pilgrims, which is what the crusade was fought about in the first place. But Elias had approved that treaty against the advice of Gregory the Ninth, so he excommunicated him. Elias was eventually reconciled on his deathbed, but it left this notion that Brother Elias was an excommunicate and therefore a scandal to the order. And in many of the early documents, his name was removed from the historical record. Suddenly, that blessing of Brother Elias from 1228, 11 years before he ran into this problem with the Pope, suddenly it became kind of an embarrassment. So we get an alternate story. Brother Bernard gets blessed with the right hand, and Brother Elias with the left hand. And we know the left hand blessing is not so great. Now let's find a clever solution where someone will try to reconcile these two opposing traditions. In the remembrance of the desire of a soul, Thomas of Celano, 20 years after the death of Francis in 1245, retells the story of the death of Francis after many years of accumulating new stories from those who had known him, and just a few years after Brother Elias was excommunicated. Here's how he tries to reconcile the two accounts. As all the brothers sat around him, he stretched out his right hand over them, and beginning with his vicar, unnamed, but that would be Brother Elias, he placed it on each of their heads, saying, "Goodbye, my sons. Live in the fear of the Lord, and remain in it always. A great trial and tribulation is at hand. Happy are they who will persevere in the things they have begun. I am hurrying to God, to whose grace I commend you all." He then blessed, in those who were there, all the other brothers who were living anywhere in the world, and those who were to come after them until the end of all ages. Let no one claim this blessing as his own, for he pronounced it for those absent through those present. As written elsewhere, it sounded like something for an individual. Instead, it should be redirected to the office. So what Thomas is saying, okay, 20 years ago, I wrote that he blessed Elias. That now does not sound like such a great idea. So it wasn't about Elias as an individual. It was about the office of being vicar of the order. Okay. So, I mean, even his explanation makes it sound a little bit like he's in a tough spot. We now move to the next question. That concerned who got blessed. And as we can see, it could be Elias, it could be Bernard, or it could be all the brothers, depending on which source you read. But the bigger question is who all was there? Who was present at the death of Francis? Once again, a good place to start is the earliest account from Thomas of Celano. And here's what he said. This view is represented in a beautiful painting from the 19th century by the Italian artist Domenico Bruschi, which is actually painted on the chapel of the little church there, the Porziuncula, St. Mary of the Angels in Assisi. It's a 19th century German romantic kind of view of the death of Francis. Thomas writes, "He then ordered the book of the Gospels brought in. He asked that the Gospel according to John be read to him, starting with the passage that begins 6 days before the Passover. Jesus, knowing that the hour had come for him to pass from this world to the Father. This was the very gospel that his minister had planned to read, even before he was told to do so. That was the passage that met his eye as he first opened the book, although he had the complete Bible from which to read the gospel. So we agree that there are brothers there. The minister or the provincial is there, and he's going to read from the Gospel of John. Here, Giotto, in his fresco of the funeral of St. Francis from the Basilica, pictures Francis immediately after death as his body is venerated by the brothers. Only brothers surround the body. Thomas's account goes on in this way. He told them to cover him with sackcloth and to sprinkle him with ashes, as he was soon to become dust and ashes. Many brothers gathered there, for whom he was both father and leader. They stood there reverently, all awaiting his blessed departure and happy end. And then that most holy soul was released from the flesh, and as it was absorbed into the abyss of light, his body fell asleep in the Lord. That's a pretty clean story. The brothers are there. The minister, his local superior, is there. They're reading the gospel. After they have prayed, Francis simply passes over into eternal life. Uh, Very simple telling. Thomas starts to say, well, yeah, but then some other people did kind of start showing up. And this is where it starts to get kind of interesting. Francis at the body, surrounded by the brothers. Then we have a group of friars who are dressed in albs or long surplices, presumably saying the prayers for the dead. They're going to take the body up into the town for a funeral. But in the background, what we see are also some other people, and some of these seem to be people of the town. And this is pretty much in accord with what Thomas will write. When the people heard of the passing of our Blessed Father, and news of the miracle had spread, they hurried to the place to see with their own eyes, so they could dispel all doubt and add joy to their love. A great number of the citizens of Assisi were admitted to contemplate those sacred marks. So these are the stigmata. You see the friar there at the base kissing the foot of Francis. You can see, maybe not so clearly, that one of the brothers in the middle of the picture is holding the hand of Francis. They're looking at these marks, the stigmata on the body. One of them, so now we're going to talk about this group of people surrounding the body. That person is pictured there nearest to us and not wearing a brown friar's tunic, but wearing a kind of a red cape with a funny cap on his head. And he's looking into a cut in the side of Francis's tunic to examine his side. He's looking for that mark of a scar or a wound on Francis's right side. Thomas of Celano acknowledges the presence of this person along with the brothers. One of them, a knight who was educated and prudent, Jerome by name, a distinguished and famous man, had doubts about these sacred signs and was unbelieving, like Thomas. Fervently and boldly, in the presence of the brothers and the citizens, he did not hesitate to move the nails and touch with his hands the saints' hands and feet and side. Now we have to remember that the earliest description of the stigmata, or these marks on the body of Francis, said that they looked like the heads of nails made from his flesh, and there was a wound with a scar on his right side. That's what's being represented here. So now, in addition to the brothers, we have the brothers plus one, the knight whose name is Jerome. Here in a close-up, you can see how Jerome is actually kind of pulling at the clothing of Francis to get a good look at his side, while the brother in the background is kissing the marks on the wound. So he's a believer, the friar back there, and Jerome is taking the part of the doubting Thomas, like Thomas the Apostle, who does not believe in the resurrection of the Lord until he sees the marks of the nails and the sign of the lance on the body of Jesus. The famous Dominican artist from Florence, Fra Angelico, captures this moment in his own beautiful portrayal of what is called the lamentation over the death of St. Francis. And here we see, for the most part, a group of friars gathered around, but we have the addition, characteristically in a red cloak, of Jerome the knight, who is doing his job of examining the side of Francis, while other brothers venerate the foot of Francis and his, looks like his face. They're kind of looking at him. But notice we've now added two other characters over on the left-hand side of the picture. One dressed in a very beautiful long red gown with a red hat, which is typical of the dress of medical doctors in the 13th century. And we know of a medical doctor who was a good friend of Francis, John of Greccio, may be represented here. But look at his left, there's another gentleman there with a very long beard and a turban. That looks to me like he could be a Saracen or a Muslim. And I'm just wondering if that is not supposed to represent Malek el-Kamil, the Sultan of Egypt. Not that we believe that he came to Assisi for the death of Francis, but I can't explain that character in any other way. Clearly meant to be exotic. The Italian artist Domenico Ghirlandaio in the 15th century, like Fra Angelico is also 15th century, now has pictured a kind of move in the main characters of this scene. We've replaced the Jerome at the right side of Francis, examining his side, with a friar who is kneeling there kissing his hand, while another friar kisses his foot and a third friar kisses his left hand. Jerome is still present, but now he has to reach over from the opposite side in order to examine the wound on the right side of Francis. But some other characters have been added to the picture as well. We have a bishop. Where did he come from? And we have laymen on both the left and the right, including a young boy on the right-hand side, who have now joined in this scene. We're getting a bigger and bigger kind of family joined around Francis. It's going to get even bigger. When the Italian artist Sassetta, in the 15th century as well, makes his beautiful altarpiece for the Church of St. Francis in Borgo San Sepolcro, he depicts the death of St. Francis and the preparation for the funeral. Here we see the brothers, as we should expect. We see Jerome on the far side of the body with his red hat, examining the side wound. We also see here that bishop, who doesn't seem to disappear from the paintings from this time on. We see laymen on the left-hand side, dressed in blue and in green. But now we have the figure of a woman who has taken the place where Jerome usually is. This woman is unidentified in the picture. We don't see her face. We only see her outline, and we see that she has a linen cloth over her forehead and under her chin. It will not take very long for people to figure out who this is, because Thomas of Celano writes another story. In around 1250, Thomas is asked by the friars to compose an account of the miracles of St. Francis. This is called the Treatise on the Miracles. And among the miracles there, one of the first ones is the stigmata of St. Francis and who saw it. Who are the witnesses to the stigmata? Those who were present at the death and the funeral of Francis. In chapter 6 of this treatise, he writes the following new information. Jacoba de Sette Soli, equal in fame and holiness in the city of Rome, earned the privilege of special love from the saint. The saint was bedridden with that illness by which, putting off all his weariness, he was about to complete the race with a blessed ending. A few days before his death, he decided to send for Lady Jacoba in Rome, telling her that if she wanted to see the one whom she so loved warmly as an exile, she should come with all haste, because he was about to return to his homeland. A letter was written, a messenger noted for his swiftness was sought, and once he was found, was outfitted for the journey. Just then, there was heard at the door the sound of horses, the commotion of knights, the crowd of an escort. One of the companions, the one who had given the instructions to the messenger, went to the door and found there present the one whom he sought because absent. Here's the depiction of this scene from the 17th century Catalan artist Antoni Viladomat y Manalt, where front and center now we see the face of that woman with the linen cloth around her head, the widow, Lady Jacoba de Sette Soli, and she alone is examining the stigmata of Francis. Thomas continues, he was struck with wonder and ran very quickly to the saint. Unable to restrain himself for joy, he said, I have good news for you, Father. Without a pause, the saint immediately said, Blessed be God who has brought our brother, Lady Jacoba, to us. Open the doors, bring her in. The decree about women is not observed here for Lady Jacoba, Brother Jacoba. To make the miracle complete, it was discovered the holy woman had brought with her everything that the letter just written had requested for the Father's burial. God supplied everything that he wanted. She brought ash-colored cloth to cover the body, many candles, a cloth for his face, a cushion for his head, and a special dish the saint longed for. These are the famous mostachola or almond cookies of Lady Jacoba. So the lady, here depicted now by the Slovenian artist Blaž Farnik, the death of St. Francis, around the time of the Second World War. There's Lady Jacoba to the right. The lady gave orders that the rest of her escort should leave. She alone with her children and a few attendants would remain. The saint said, no, don't. I will depart on Saturday. On Sunday, you and the others will return. And so it happened. At the predicted time, he who fought valiantly in the church militant entered the church triumphant. I omit here the crowds of people, the shouts of rejoicing, the ringing of bells, the streams of tears. I leave out the crying of his sons, the sobbing of those dear to him. I only want to recount how this pilgrim was consoled at the death of her father. So this is Lady Jacoba. All wet with tears, pictured here by the Spanish artist, Jose Camarón Boronat, 18th century. Wet with tears, she was brought in private and alone, and the body of her friend was placed in her arms. Here, said his vicar, that would be Brother Elias, hold even in death the one you loved when alive. Her warm tears bathed his body, and with sobs and sighs she kept hugging and kissing and pulled back the veil to see him unveiled. What did she see? She gazed on that precious vessel that hid a precious treasure adorned with 5 pearls. She beheld those engravings that the hand of God alone had produced for the whole world to admire. So these are the stigmata. Right then, she counseled that such an unheard of miracle should not be disguised or hidden any more. From the Spanish artist Josep Benluri Gil, early 20th century. She has seen the stigmata and wisely advised that it should be displayed for all to see with their own eyes. All ran to see this sight and were able to verify for themselves what God had not done for any other nation. The French Basque Benedictine artist, Dom Pedro Subercasu Arazuris, does this beautiful portrait of St. Francis's death in 1925, Lady Jacoba at his feet. Here I will put down my pen rather than try to explain something which I cannot. Giovanni Frigia Penate, son of Lady Jacoba, was then a boy, afterwards a count of the sacred palace in Rome. He freely swears and declares that at the time he was with his mother, and he saw this and with his own eyes, and touched it with his hands. Let that lady pilgrim now return to her homeland. We can now return to what happened after the saint's death. That crowd has changed from the brothers to the addition of a knight, the addition of a bishop and layman, and finally we found out something that Thomas only tells us 25 years after the fact. The whole time, Lady Jacoba and her son, 8-year-old Giovanni, were there. The crowd really changes in the different accounts. And perhaps my favorite of all the portrayals of the death of Francis is this one by the relatively obscure Italian artist Bartolomeo di Tommaso da Foligno, 15th century, the death of St. Francis. Here we have the brothers present. We have a whole gaggle of bishops in the middle of the room. We have practically the whole city of Assisi. And if you look over on the right-hand side by the door, there's a man sitting on a chair with a 3-crown tiara on his head. It's the Pope himself who is drawing up the decree of canonization with a secretary who is taking dictation at his feet. I think that is a great picture. Everybody and his uncle is there, including the dogs and cats underneath the body of the saint. I hope you've enjoyed this little journey through the literary text describing in different ways who got blessed as Francis was dying and who was present at the death itself. For those of you who will be celebrating the Transitus or are responsible for developing texts to be used for these celebrations of the death of St. Francis, I hope I've given you a little idea of the wealth of choices that you have. May the Lord give you peace.